Good evening, everyone. How's everybody this evening? Good. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us. My name is Erica Fields, and I'm the Executive Director of the City of Dayton Human Relations Council. And on behalf of HRC and our Community Police Council and the city, I thank you for joining us this evening. I first and foremost want to thank our panelists who are with you this evening, members of the CPC, our facilitator, Joshua Ward, coroner, and Mayor Nan Whaley, who you'll be hearing from later on this evening. Thank you for Pastor Sherry for allowing us to use her space. The police department and I think police chief who is with us as well. And especially to you all, members of the community, thank you for being here this evening. I think it's really important that we're having this critical conversation. As you all know, recent events that have happened locally and nationally have really challenged us. And I think it's really important that we and challenge our overall mission, I think, as an organization, and highlighted the importance of our work. The HRC is responsible for enforcing the city's anti-discrimination ordinances and protecting the civil rights protections for everybody who lives, works, and plays within the city of Dayton. And it's no surprise, and I'm not saying anything new to you when I say that we have significant challenges that we have to overcome as a community to ensure safe and inclusive communities for all people. And swift action is really needed when we're looking at reducing all forms of gun violence in all neighborhoods for everybody, no matter your race, your religion.
It needs to be done to end this violence. Often we sit at these tables and we think we know what's best for you all, but nobody knows what's better for you than you. So we appreciate you guys coming out, letting us know what's on your hearts and your minds, and we'll do everything in our power to continue to move the agenda forward. We want to make the city of Dayton the best place it could ever be, the safest place it could ever be. We've been on national news for the wrong reasons, way too many times in the last month or so. We want to change that narrative around, and we cannot do that without you guys. So again, I want to echo everything Erica said. I want to thank everybody for coming, and I hope you get some work done tonight. Thank you. Please ask the elected officials to stand so we can recognize your presence. Joshua Ward.
You guys hear me? Is this microphone picking up? Can you hear me? Is that all right? All right, good evening. My name is Joshua Ward. I am the pastor-elect of Omega Baptist Church, right down the street, and honored to be a part of this important conversation. My job at this point is to give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to do tonight, how our discussion will flow. And so immediately after this, we will hear from our mayor, Nan Whaley, who will share some remarks. And following her remarks, we will move to the panel. And what we'll do is we'll have each member of the panel introduce themselves. I'll call their name, they'll introduce themselves, and then I'll have a question for you to answer. And then once the panel has answered those questions, we're going to open it up for a community conversation. And so we will have a couple of microphones available here. There were index cards that people should have received on their way in. If you need an index card, please raise your hand, and we can make sure that we get you one. But then you also have an opportunity as well to just speak your questions as well. The index cards are for people who may not be comfortable speaking in this audience. And then following that community conversation or discussion, we will have some closing remarks. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to our mayor, Nan Whaley, to share some remarks.
Thank you, Pastor. Well, I want to thank you all for taking 2 hours out of your evening to be here tonight. I certainly appreciate it and see a lot of faces that have been doing a lot of activism, not only over the past couple months, but over the years. So I appreciate that. I want to recognize that Crisis Care is here tonight. So Crisis Care if you'd like, look in the back, there's these two lovely women here. So, look, they're here for resources. If you need to talk to someone, there's also resources on the front entrance table that you can grab. You know, we know that these different issues have been affecting people at different times in different ways, and so we really appreciate the great work that Crisis Care has been doing across the community over these past few months. So, you know, when I talk about the issues going on right now with Dayton regarding gun violence, a lot of national attention has been on what happened in the Oregon District on August 4th. But I want to back up a little bit and just talk about, you know, what we've seen over the past 45 or 50 days, right? And I don't know if you remember, but there was a Family Dollar murder-suicide in the parking lot of a woman who had a civil protection order against her significant other, who then went to the Family Dollar and shot her and then killed himself. Do you remember that? And then there was, of course, the Oregon District shooting in August, which was a mass shooting with an assault-like weapon and a 100-capacity magazine. And then last week, I think, was the shooting of Devin Henderson and Javier from two 17-year-old boys in our community who were gunned down, right? So if you look at what's happening in our community, we're seeing all different kinds of gun issues in all different ways. And so it brings each of us here for a different reason, but the same reason, right? It's about gun violence in our community. And as mayor for the past 6 years, and being on the city commission now, I've been at City Hall for almost over 13 years, you know, gun violence is something that is all too common in our community. And it becomes normalized, and it becomes a regular occurrence. It's something that comes across my cell phone as a text message, far too common. And when you have big events that are super unfortunate, like what happened on August 4th, it raises awareness to a level where everyone's paying attention. And so we use that opportunity to say, hey, this is an issue that's been going on in our community, and then we continue to see it, right? And what I heard from the community on the night of August 4th is that they wanted us to take action. They wanted us to do something, right? Which has now become even a national cry from something that just started in the streets of Dayton that evening. And so, you know, I am doing everything I can to move forward the story of Dayton, not just the story of what happened at the Oregon District, but the story of these two young boys, the story of the woman that had the civil protection order, because they're all lives lost. So let me just give a couple of things that we're doing so you guys have a good sense about what's happening right now and how you can get active as well. So last night I was with the governor. The governor has moved forward. He heard the call to do something and announced a 17-point plan initiative that he is working as a package to move forward in the very difficult state legislature of the Ohio House and Senate. What does this plan entail? It has extreme risk protection orders, so a lot like what we're talking about when we know somebody, a family member knows somebody that has a lot of guns, that seems that they've had some actions that make us nervous, there's an opportunity to go and make sure we deal with that. Like typical, I think they call them extreme risk protection orders, we call them your red flag laws. They're in 17 states now. So that is one piece. He's working on background checks, which is apparently a very big deal, and I'm a little confused why, since 90% of Ohioans think background checks make sense, but very difficult to get through the legislature. Escalating penalties for repeat offenders. So what that is we have a federal law that we use, and we've used in the past with our Citizen Initiative to Reduce Gun Violence and other pieces, where if you have a gun and you're not supposed to have a gun and you've already been caught with a gun, so you've had a gun offense already, it allows you to have a longer penalty, a larger penalty because of the previous gun violation. And we do this a lot under federal law, but we don't do it a lot, we do it a bit because the federal system doesn't allow us to move very many people through that. What he's basically doing is taking the state law to equal the federal law, which would really help us with some very violent offenders in our community. I talked to the chief about this. This is an issue that most police chiefs and prosecutors talk about that would be really helpful to us as we try to deal with the most dangerous guns to get them off of our streets. And that's an important issue for us in our community. Straw purchases. So I think I've been talking about straw purchases since my first year on the city commission. Sometimes they're also called the gun show loophole. It's a way, again, closing these places where people that shouldn't get guns are able to get them because there's huge gaping holes in the ability to get a weapon. And then he announced last week that they're increasing this whole system, the system of having the data across the state on warrants and other issues for the background check system to be fully coordinated. And so we're supportive of that as well. And the state is paying it, which is a new thing for us with this governor. In the past, the state really liked to do what we call unfunded mandates to local communities, but recognizes that this needs to be a state initiative. Finally, separate, I think, really, but part of this is that our mental health systems have been overwhelmed in this state and have been cut basically during the Great Recession and never really have come back. So increasing the number of beds in state and psychiatric hospitals is something else the governor is doing. That is really much needed. We've seen that not just in this issue around guns, but just in general, that people need to have places to go. And right now, the mental health system is so overwhelmed in the state that basically, you basically have to be arrested to get in a hospital. And there should be more avenues for people to seek mental health treatment, and so they're increasing that as well. So I'm supporting these efforts and doing everything I can because I feel like the governor has said, okay, I've heard you, Dayton, I'm going to do these 17 things. They're not enough in my mind. I'm in favor of an assault weapons ban. I'm in favor of a universal background check. I'm in favor of the end of classified. But I also recognize that we're turning a boat up in Columbus, right? So this Titanic is going into the iceberg of let's arm students. That was last year's conversation. To hey, let's have some common sense legislation. So I'd rather get on the boat going that way. And then what are other things that we can do to continue to move? Because this is a movement, and this is work that will not be done. And it's not something that we'll say, oh, we got that through, well done us. We've got this figured out. This is something we'll continue to work on. And I just want to say, too, for the Dayton City Commission, and for me, this is something we've worked on for years, even before the tragedy in the district, before all of these issues. Resolution after resolution we've passed to say, hey, we're against this, we've sued, we're on amicus brief after amicus brief over preemption issues. So this is something that we've been passionate about for a very long time. Our voice is just a bit louder because we've gone through such tragedy, and so we're planning on using that voice. Next Monday and Tuesday, I'll be in Washington, D.C. I will do a meeting with the White House in the afternoon, and I will meet with the senators and with the Senate Democrats on Tuesday, again, with the sole purpose of getting an up or down vote on universal background checks in the U.S. Senate. So, here's what you can do. Call Rob Portman, okay? Everybody here continues to call Rob Portman and say, Senator, we want an up or down vote on background checks. We want you to vote in favor of universal background checks. That will make a difference. Rob Portman. Okay, and then as we work through the State House, we're going to have targets of legislators here that we'll need to call and advocate that you're probably living in their districts. And so please put your name down. We'll be in touch with you on ways that we can take action as we work through the state legislature, which will be very difficult. So I know that there's different things that people will do, and I know people are frustrated for all different reasons around this culture of gun violence in our community. But the important thing here is that we are all together, right? So we might have different emotional reasons why we're here, or it might be a different shooting that has made us come to this meeting. But the point is we're all together and making movements on stopping gun violence in our community. And this is going to be a hard-fought, long challenge. So we need to stay together and continue to move in the direction to make our communities safer. That's what I'm asking you to do. We all have different suffering. We all feel different pain from these tragedies. None of them are more special or more than unique than each other. We're all different. We will all feel trauma at different times. It is imperative that our communities stay together as we fight to make Dayton a better place, a safer place, make our state and country a safer place as well. To that end, I'm so proud of the work that the Human Relations Council, the Community Police Council, and Dayton Police do. This work that they've been doing has been going on rather quietly, sometimes loudly every once in a while, for almost a decade. These folks are volunteers that come in and month out to deal with issues in our community around safety. And they do, they have the tough questions, and we listen to what they have to say very heavily because they're putting the time in to build a relationship with police, to hold truth to power on that issue, but then also to say how we can be better. And that's all we're trying to do in this community, and I am so grateful. You all are here to take action, to advocate, to demand better, and to demand justice out of these terrible shootings. Thank you all for being here tonight.
And so we have an awesome panel for us here this evening, and we have our police chief, Dayton Police Chief, Chief Richard Beal, along with 5 members of the Community Police Council that Mayor Whaley just spoke about the incredibly important, often challenging work that they do month in and month out. And so what I'd like to do is, I'm going to go to you first, Chief Beal. And what I'd like is if you would please introduce yourself, and then I have a question for you as well that I'd like to ask if you would answer. We know that you can't speak in detail regarding the incident involving the 2 17-year-olds that lost their lives, as the case is still under investigation. But I want to ask if you would be willing to provide a general update on where we are in regards to that situation.
So certainly, I'm Richard Beal, Police Chief for the City of Dayton, and have been so now for more than 11 years. And I've spent more than 40 years in policing, so I got a pretty long view of a lot of issues that affect communities, and particularly our community. As I said last week, the death of 2 17-year-olds was deeply, deeply tragic. I met with the coroner, along with other members of command staff and investigators the very next day to get a very detailed understanding of some of the evidence. I also contacted the prosecutor, Matt Heck, that same day and made sure he was alerted to the significance of this crime, or this, well, we will determine, right? We'll get to that point in a minute. But clearly what is a homicide, the question is whether it's justifiable in our community. We also met with the prosecutor's office today, so this is receiving daily attention of my senior command staff, myself, as well as expedited and concentrated effort by homicide detectives. I will tell you that this case is, any homicide case is complex. So it requires that all evidence be available in order to determine legality, and once determined that the conduct is illegal, to be able to prosecute a case. So the evidence all must be available. A critical portion of that is the coroner's examination and final report. Nothing moves forward before that is done, because the coroner determines cause and manner of death. And then the prosecutor's office would then look at the evidence related to what will be deemed a homicide by the coroner to determine whether in fact that was lawful conduct or whether that was a criminal act. So some of the processes this involves is ballistics examination and evidence. It involves examination of DNA evidence, crime scene photos, crime scene sketches, witness interviews. All of that has to be available before the prosecutor's office can make a determination whether in fact this is crime and whether it will be prosecuted as such. So that is an ongoing conversation, that's an ongoing dialogue. And we will have to wait for that process, that evidence, the investigation to be completed. And we're not going to be able to move forward until we're able to get all the evidence the prosecutor's office believes is necessary. They have a complete understanding of what happened and how it happened and intent of the person who is responsible for the deaths and the law that applies in this case, which I mentioned last night and I mentioned last week, has changed. So the law now requires that the prosecutor, the state in essence, bears the burden of proof that if someone has acted in self-defense, to prove that it was not an act of self-defense. In fact, it was unwarranted use of lethal force resulting in death, therefore a crime. Prior to recent months, it was required that someone asserting a self-defense position had to prove that it was truly self-defense. So the tables have been reversed, the burden has been shifted. The person who used lethal force is not required to prove that it was self-defense. It's the burden of the state government, in essence, to prove that it was not. So that was a significant change in law, and that law governs this case because the law was passed some months ago. Which is why I want to emphasize it's just going to take patience here. I've been involved in enough, way too many, homicide or death investigations, and they take time. Toxicology tests will need to be concluded. Those typically take 6 weeks. So there's just a lot of process ahead of us, and that has to be completed, and when it is done, we will turn over all evidence at our disposal to the prosecutor. And then we have the prosecutor to either review that, what they call a 3-prosecutor panel, or to present it to grand jury, depending on their judgment about how the best way to proceed. And then we will know that answer when the prosecutor is ready to announce that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Fields. I want to go now to Reverend Branford Brown. And Mr. Brown, I'd ask that you do the same, introduce yourself and kind of your role with the CPC. But the question I'd like you to address is that many people say that Mr. Harrison and Mr. Henderson, the 2 young men shot and killed on August 28th, were murdered, and the property owner that shot them should not be protected by Ohio's Castle Doctrine. And so as a CPC member and also a practicing attorney, would you mind telling us a little bit about your understanding of Ohio's law in this regard, and if you believe that the property owner should be protected by that Ohio law?
Thank you, Pastor. To introduce myself, I'm a practicing attorney with this year will make 30 years of practice under my belt. I do primarily family law and criminal. I guess one of the things I'd like to do is to also put a disclaimer there. I don't have all of the evidence that the police and the prosecutor will look at. And so I can't give a very specific answer, but what I'd like to do is kind of share the reasons why from what I've read and viewed that I think that, and hope that the prosecutor will act and declare this a case of murder. And the defense that you referred to is called the Castle Doctrine. This defense was codified by the Ohio legislature back in 2008, and it's on the premise that a person ought to feel safe in their home or in their castle, and therefore someone who breaks in or enters their, if an intruder enters into their domicile, then they have a right, they do not have to retreat, but they have a right to apply deadly force. So a couple of things to add to that. First off, in Ohio, the law in almost no case allows you to shoot a person or use deadly force with regards to property. And so that's a standing principle of Ohio jurisprudence. In the defense of the Castle law, it's very clear. It says, first off, that the person has to be an intruder. There's some case law that says that you have to believe, right or wrong, that that person is going or has the potential to apply deadly force to you. And that person has to be breaking into a domicile or a home that's a dwelling place, or that one would reasonably assume that somebody could be sleeping in that place. Just imagine if you were sleeping and someone woke you and they had a gun or a weapon, you certainly wouldn't want to be able to defend yourself. And I think that's the basis of the law. From what I understand, and Chief could correct me, this, I think, does not apply under the Castle Doctrine, as it was a separate building, was not attached. The Ohio Revised Code 290105 is very clear that it has to be a dwelling place or a place where a reasonable person would think that someone was sleeping in. It's my understanding this was a separate garage that was not attached. It was not a porch, because a dwelling place could be a tent. It could be a building that's attached to your home. It could be your porch, but I don't believe that it could be a non-attached garage, and if that was the case, I think, and again, I don't have the specific facts, but the Castle Doctrine also says that if a person is fleeing from that domicile, then you don't have that presumption that you're allowed to shoot as well. And I'm not sure if these young men were running away. I know that the one young man did run away once the shooting started. So that's another issue that I have or believe that falls within the realm of considering this to be murder or manslaughter or something to that effect. The Chief is correct that the burden has shifted in terms of this law, so that it used to be you had to defend and say that no, I have a defense for shooting, and now the prosecutor has to prove that you did not have a defense. And so it's going to be a difficult case, but I do believe and I hope that from the facts, if they remain as we've been told, that the county prosecutor would present that to either the three prosecutors or to the grand jury, and that there would be some finding that deadly force was used and was not justified under the law.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. I want to switch gears a little bit. We have heard a little bit about the work of the CPC, the Community Police Council, and as Mayor Whaley shared, they have been working together and meeting and discussing together for almost a decade now. And I just want to ask you, Mr. Sliver, if you would introduce yourself, and then just tell us a little bit about the work of the CPC, why you joined the CPC, and what your experience on the council has been thus far.
Well, hi everybody. My name is Scott Sliver. I'm a community member. I ended up on the Community Police Council, where I was invited to at least apply to be on the council by Jared Grandy. I live at West 2nd Street in Euclid, which is directly behind my house, faces the back of Mount Eden Church. Okay, so I'm 2 blocks from James H. and West 3rd. Okay, my wife and I bought a house there. We've been there almost 3 years. And I guess you might say we bit off a little more than we could chew. You know, it was a little bit different than maybe we sort of thought it would be. We'd been there a few months, maybe just several weeks, and there was a shooting. Now, shots being fired, hearing gunfire at our house is normal. I hate that it's normal, but we hear it, my wife hears it more often than I do, but it's a pretty regular thing. The first time we heard it, it was really close. And so we picked up the phone and we called 911, and I said, hey, I'd like to report shots fired. And I said, it sounds like it was right outside of our house. It was very close. And, you know, I'm thinking the police are gonna show up, I'm gonna get a call back, something's gonna happen. Nothing happened. Didn't see anything, didn't hear any more that night. It was maybe 10:45 p.m. when that happened. The next morning, I got in my car. I drove over to the station on, what is it, over by Ponitz. And I showed up there and I said, hey, I'd like to speak to a sergeant. And they said, what about? And I said, well, there were shots fired in my neighborhood last night, and I didn't hear anything, and I'd just like to talk to somebody and find out what's up with that. I don't think it's too much to ask, right? And, but I understand, because I've been there 3 years. I mean, shots fired is like night after night after night, and sometimes you can't tell where they're coming from and how close they were, and if somebody's just shooting, you know, just shooting to shoot, or if there's something actually happening, right? If somebody's shooting at someone else. So the sergeant came out, and I introduced myself, and I said, can you just help me understand this? When I call with a report of shots fired outside my house, and no one responds, you know, and I smiled real big. And he said, well, I'll be right back. And he went back and he pulled a report. And he said, yeah, you called at exactly the same time. To give you a perspective, our houses would have butted up against each other, except they're on the opposite side of Euclid. So they are behind me and across the street, right? And they said, oh, yep, 1523 West 1st called at exactly the same time that you called. Police responded to them. And I went, good, why didn't they respond to me? And I'll never forget, he looked down at his toe, he was tapping his toe, and he said, I don't have a good answer for that. I said, well, is it too much to ask that I just get a call back? Hello, Mr. Sliver, just want to let you know there was a shooting at your neighbor's house. It's all clear. And I said, is that too much to ask? And he said, no, it's not too much to ask. I have called since then, and I got a response, hey, it's us again, 1601 West 2nd, more shots fired, and the dispatch said, what do you want us to do? And I said, I want you to take a report, I want you to send an officer out, I want another notation in our file that there were shots fired. And I said, oh, and by the way, I went out into the street because I was sitting with my back to a window, and I heard bam, bam, bam. And I went, oh, that's right out here. And I envisioned the whole thing, the driver's driving, the passenger leans out, just fires their gun 3 times. They're gonna be evenly spaced. I took my flashlight into the street, found 2 of the casings, and I said, I want you to come over, I got these casings. You know, I don't know that they'll help you with another investigation, whatever the story is. 2 police officers came over, and the one officer had a flashlight. He found, oh, there's the 3rd casing. This is pretty much normal. There was a shooting half a block down the street between me and where our house is on Euclid and James H's Antioch. It's just a little side street. There was a shooting there just maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago, and the guy was shot, and he was in his car, he drove across James H. McGee and ended up in the playground at Dayton Boys Prep, where some boys from my neighborhood were playing. Now, they were at my house. My wife likes to give kids gum and stuff. They come and knock on the door. And so they come in. They were playing my Xbox, and I said, hey, did you guys hear about that shooting? Oh, yeah, we were at the playground. And he's like on my Xbox, eating his Starburst and talking about a guy who'd been shot and crashed into the playground equipment. And I said, what'd you guys do? Well, we ran, but then we went back. And I said, what'd you see? Well, he was shot here and here, and he was falling asleep and waking up. And he's telling me this like this is normal. So when I was telling Jared a couple of these stories, it's been a few years. I've been on the council now a couple of years. I just said, what do we do? And he said, well, why don't you join the police council? And what you're hearing here is a pretty good depiction of what happens behind the scenes. When you hear about a shooting, the one over on, it was near Germantown Pike, we had the briefing on it. There was a chase involved and everything. And we asked tough questions, because he's got a gun and he's running, and then he's shot, he doesn't have the gun, he ditched the gun along the way. Was he shot from the front? Was he shot from the back? What's going on? So there's a lot of difficult conversations that happen. And so I'm here just as a community member who, has experienced, some inaction and just decided to try and do something, right? And that's why you're all here tonight, because you want to make a difference, right? So that's it, Josh.
Thank you. And so we have 3 more panelists to go through, and I'm sorry you guys are kind of getting a little bit of the short end of this thing, but we want to be sure to have room for you all to have some questions and conversation as well within the allotted time. And so I want to go to you next, Natasha Spears. And Natasha, I'm going to ask if you would introduce yourself, and then also talk a little bit about your role. I know you, as the former director of the Boys and Girls Club, you spent a lot of time in the neighborhood that Mr. Henderson and Mr. Harrison lived in. And I'm wondering if you could share briefly a little bit more about that community, and even more importantly, what some ideas you have about what we could be doing as a community to uplift the young people there, how we can use community voice and collective action to assist the CPC movement.
And in the interest of letting other people ask questions from here, could we keep it to 5 minutes for these folks up front?
So, first I need to say that, to me, these young men are not Mr. Henderson and Mr. Harrison. I have known Devin Henderson and his twin since he was 3 years old. Within 15 minutes of him losing his life, the 2 phones that I have seated in front of me were ringing. It's hard to bury a child who you've known since they were 3 years old. When you talk about the community where the DeSoto Bass projects are, or Clement, where this incident happened, one of the things that is really important to me is shifting the narrative. When we talk about these communities, they're high-risk communities. When we talk about the children who live in these communities, they're underprivileged children. When you hear those things enough about the places where you live and about who you are, you become what's put into you. So in my building, when I was there, we were committed to high promise neighborhoods and the young scholars with promise, because we had to tell them every day where they lived and who they could become. Something has happened in this city, and I'm not a native Daytonian, where we have become comfortable with the pockets of poverty as if they don't exist. Because here's the reality. East Dayton doesn't look a whole lot different than West Dayton. The color of the skin is just different. But we're comfortable with those people because we don't traverse those areas every day. I've been gone from the Boys and Girls Club 2 years. I'm in that neighborhood every day because those are still my kids and those are still my families. That's why I sit in this seat. I've been on the CPC off and on in various forms for nearly since its inception. Because I've been a youth advocate since I was 9 years old. I knew that I wanted to take care of young people and give them a voice because they tend not to have one. We've got to stop acting like this issue is their problem. We've also got to start to deal with some real issues. We talk about gun violence, and that is absolutely important. We talk about mental health, but can we have a conversation about poverty? Say it again. Poverty is not black, it's not white, it's this muddy, ashy thing that makes you angry at 7, at 17, at 27, at 37. And if you're angry, you fight. That's what people who are angry do. They lash out. They may not even lash out at the right person. I can't go to Chief Bill's office and act a plum fool. So I act a plum fool with the people who are closest to me. Not because I don't love you, but because I'm angry. Because I haven't eaten. Because I'm wearing old ratty clothes and I'm watching everybody I go to school with in new J's and new clothes and being able to have Xboxes and all of these things. Those little boys go to his house and play Xbox because they don't have one at their house. And I'm going to tell you this, my prayer is that one day they don't try to walk in his house and take his as good as he's been to them. But the reality is that's possible. We have to deal with poverty in this community. If we choose not to, we will continue to have these meetings, and the people who we are talking about will continue to not be represented in the room.
All right, Deion Sampson, you got to touch back and father. Brother Sampson, as a CPC member and known community advocate, do you believe that we're moving in the right direction? Are you seeing any progress made? And if not, what do you believe is stopping us from moving forward?
Deion Sampson, native Daytonian, love my city. I believe that any opportunity you get to have a real dialogue like we do at the CPC, I think Jared said it best, we don't all get along. We get along, we just don't agree with everything everyone is saying because we see different things from different perspectives. So I happen to be this community advocate, and there are some great people in this sanctuary who, what we call boots on the ground, who are doing some amazing things. And if I could call them, I would, but I know I gotta be, short. But there are some great people in our city who love our young people, love our community. I believe that the CPC is going in the right direction as it relates to starting the conversation. But one of the things Natasha said that I think can be challenging is when we have these conversations, we don't have an avenue where we can keep the community informed of the conversations that we're having. And so when it comes to violence, I say everything that she said, just not as good as she said it. But until we want to talk about gun violence, but we need to talk about the violence. And I'm talking about the violence of the city, violence of the county,
So the mere definition of violence is behavior involving the use of physical force so as to injure, abuse, damage, or destroy. Another definition for violence is distortion of meaning or intent. So we have to be real about the violence before we get to the gun violence. In our city, there is a violence that is being displayed to one side of our community versus the other side of our community. Until we can deal with the poverty, till we can deal with the marginalization, till we can deal with the lack of opportunities, that is violence on a section of the community that results in an outward violence. No one wants to talk about the political violence. No one wants to talk about the educational violence. We want to talk about gun violence. But until you deal with the root causes of these violence, we can talk about laws, we can talk about bills, but at the same time, we have parts of our community who are engaged by violent acts by people in power. And we have to deal with that violence. I'm done. Thank you. Before we move to our final panelist for introduction, I want to ask if you have an index card that you would like for us to read the question. If you would please raise it up so that our folks can pick them up so that we can roll right into the community discussion portion after Mr. Smith introduces himself. And so, Mr. Smith, you are working with the Dayton Human Relations Council to develop a community safety plan that has a public health approach. How would this plan help reduce gun violence in Dayton neighborhoods?
Thank you, and first of all, I want to say thank you for everybody out here. My name is Will Smith, and I was born and raised here in Dayton, Ohio, lifelong resident, family grew up here, and so I've been able to see a lot of the issues that permeate our society. And so to answer that, I don't want to just even say why or how do I think that this plan that we're working on would help to lower gun violence. We have to go into why it would. And that feeds into what Dion spoke about, what Natasha spoke about. It's because we're not getting at the root of gun violence all the time. And the work I'm doing is not only to tackle the roots, but it has to be policy. Tackling poverty has to be public policy. And when we even deconstruct poverty, we have to understand that goes into jobs, job creation. And if you dig deeper into that, it's do our people understand soft skills to get jobs? Are we able to get these jobs? It's our educational system and breaking that down and saying, okay, which kids are being put on the train, the fast track to prison and violence at a young age? And this has to be policy to make these things stop. And so what we're working on right now is something called the Greater Dayton Safety Planning Commission. And the root of this is actually looking at the roots of gun violence. And that is jobs, that's education, that's health, that's housing, that's mentorship. Because we know that violence is more prevalent in communities that lack resources. And that's something that gets pushed under the rug too many times, is that these are communities that lack resources. And if we lack resources, we can spin our heads in a circle, we can do whatever we want. You can take every gun out of America, and if these communities lack resources, they'll throw a rock at each other. They'll stab each other, because that is what happens when we lack the resources to have opportunities in our community. And we cannot keep going forward lacking these opportunities and then also pointing at communities and saying, okay, pick yourself up, West Dayton. Pick yourself up, East Dayton. This has to be policy. So what we're doing is actually looking at not only getting information from law enforcement, but getting people from the community, getting the advocates that are out here every day fighting, bleeding, sweat, tears in our community to say, okay, what are you saying? Come sit at the table. We can't just have a table of politicians. It has to be a table of people in the streets actively saying, okay, this is what we're seeing. I know this is what we're seeing. What can you do? We have to form partnerships to get this done. It can't just be, okay, a crime happens, let's call the police and hopefully they go to jail and we can stop. No. We have to have it part of education. Housing plays a big part of these things. If you go into a neighborhood that has violence, I guarantee you, you'll see blight in that community. Those things aren't coincidental, because it's a mental thing. If you look in the back of the room, you have children here. If those children don't have the opportunities, they end up being on the wrong side of violence. And we have to sit back and say, what can we do? So what we're doing with the Human Relations Council and the work we're doing is actually reaching out to resources. To say, you know what, mental health, public health, violence is a public health concern. Safety is a housing concern. Safety is an educational concern. Safety is a health concern. And too many times we don't say that safety is our health. And it's not just mental health. It's domestic violence is a safety concern. And we have to understand that if someone's crying out and saying, you know what, I'm suffering, that's a concern for safety. If we go through a neighborhood and there's mattresses and tires in neighborhoods, like you can go through Residence Park in Westwood and see mattresses and tires, there are kids growing up that says, you know what, no one cares. And that is the root of violence, is feeling no one cares. And so it has to be policy that we care. And that is what we're doing here. And I'm excited to move forward with this because I understand that we have to have each other's back. And we have to make sure that our voices at the bottom are heard by those at the top. And being heard isn't just this. Just this isn't being heard. Being heard is months later saying, you know what we heard is now being implemented. And that is how you show neighborhoods and communities that you care and that you're moving forward. So we have to work together to say, what are the problems? Create innovative solutions as a community, make sure those problems are being solved, and keep coming back in a double cycle of learning to say, what are we not doing? How are we not filling in the gaps? What are we not doing for our community? How can we step up, stand up, and do something?
I want to start with one of the questions we have on an index card. And this question, I think, is appropriate, and I think it's a fair question. And someone asked, what do we do about police corruption and cover-ups? And the only reason I say that it's fair is because I think that this group deals with those issues. And so, would anyone care to speak a little bit to this question? They didn't give a name on who this question is directed at. Poor Chief. Poor Chief.
Well, without more specific context, it's kind of hard to just answer a general question. There are mechanisms within police agencies all across the country, if they're professional agencies, that there is avenues for citizens to report misconduct. And there's a difference between lack or improper service, in other words, citizens not getting the service they deserve, and what we call misconduct. Misconduct more often violating the canons of ethics, the values of the police organization, the values of professionalism of law enforcement. So there's ways to report that. Right? There's also, if someone believes someone has committed a criminal act, that can be reported directly to the prosecutor's office. It doesn't have to be reported to the police department. The Department of Justice does, in the FBI in particular, has been tasked with the mission to investigate all political corruption. They are very active in doing so. The entity, the part of the agency that does that is walled off from the typical enforcement that's done with the FBI locally. So there's a specialized group that do nothing but that. There's litigation that can be incurred. There can be, if it's a matter of a police use of force, there's pattern and practice investigations. That was part of one of the investigations in Ferguson conducted after the fatal shooting in Michael Brown. So there's a number of agencies and avenues to pursue misconduct and or corruption. All of those are possibilities. It really depends on the nature of that corruption or conduct, and so that's important to have those particulars. So.
I'm going to let Mr. Brown speak to answer on that same question. I'm going to come back to you.
Just briefly, I also want Citizens Appeals Board, that if you have a problem with an officer, that you can either go on the line on the city's webpage or the COC's webpage, or you can come and contact Jerry Granby and file a complaint, and that board does review those complaints.
Who's on that? Who will speak to that? I think the question about police corruption is something that people are feeling that and having that sentiment, and there are things that we're doing to try and address that, I think.
So the first thing I encourage you all to do is if you witness misconduct or if you experience misconduct, file a complaint with the Professional Standards Bureau. Most cities call it internal affairs. If you disagree with that, at the conclusion of that investigation, you can file an appeal with the Citizen Appeals Board. That's a group of 5 citizens, Branford Brown, Reverend David Fox, Ann Pfeiffer, Julio Mateo, and Branford Brown. Right. So we review the case as citizens, as objective citizens with fresh eyes, and it gives us, the people, an opportunity to investigate the conduct of officers.
And can I say something too about this? A few years ago, the Citizens Appeals Board was actually appointed by the city manager, and we changed that so it would be appointed by the city commission. Again, because we want to make sure, learning from other cities, and we're always learning from other places all the time, we wanted to make sure that they were autonomous, and so they were able to look in freely and not answer to the administration side, but the elected side. And frankly, people don't use it very often. And so getting the word out that we have this is really important, and so we'd like to share that. And that's something else you could do to be helpful, is share that we have a Citizens Appeals Board.
Thank you all. Sir.
Chief Beal, 2 examples several years back. There were inmates in the Montgomery County Jail in restraints who were tortured with pepper spray at short range. That happened within the city of Dayton. The first time it happened, the officer was actually promoted. The second time it happened, nothing was done. I think we lose confidence in a police department that is willing to take their citizens who are innocent until proven guilty, place them in a jail where they are then tortured and had violence committed upon them, and those officers not only were promoted or not prosecuted, but that you continue to take citizens to that jail and put them in there. I find that reprehensible and irresponsible on your part and the city's part, and I think we've had all this committee, but there has not been anything done.
Well, David, I'll give you a couple of responses to that. One is your information is not actually completely accurate. There was a prosecution in one of those cases, and that person was found guilty. Also, there is something called jurisdiction, and when you're talking about the jail facility by statute, that's exclusive responsibility of the elected sheriff of Montgomery County. So to suggest that there's some duty by the city to investigate the sheriff's department, I think would not be recognizing statutory authority and jurisdiction of the sheriff's department. That is a matter for them to address. I believe they have taken a number of actions in that regard, including forming a committee to look at reforms at the jail itself. I don't really acting to speak on behalf of the sheriff. That's not my responsibility, but we'll just merely share that much.
So the sheriff can commit crimes against citizens of our community, and you will do nothing about it.
David, I've answered your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me take my questions from the floor. I want to raise just one point. And the one point is, the reason we are looking at the 2 young men who lost their lives because this man decided to murder them is because we're looking at law enforcement. You look at law enforcement, the coroner, law enforcement, the police department, law enforcement, the prosecutor, law enforcement. The reason we're raising this question and we want this man prosecuted is because we know that white supremacy has infiltrated law enforcement. And law enforcement does not have a good name across this country in the African American community. And we're not going to sit back and let you kill 2 African American teenagers and we not look at it and do something about it. We are still demanding that the police department present the case to the prosecutor and that man be charged with murder. And that's the reason we're saying this, because all across the country, we get a bad deal when it calls from law enforcement. And you don't have to let me call names when bad deals have happened across the country in African American communities because of law enforcement. So when y'all present that case to the prosecutor, let them know it's not going to stand in the African American community. You kill our kids and we do nothing about it. That's right. Not going to happen.
All right, we have another question. I'm going to go with this index card question. And this question is for you, Natasha. And so, Natasha, you stated that we need to talk about poverty. And what do you think that conversation should look like? What should that conversation include? What are your thoughts about how we start that conversation?
It starts with talking about earning a living wage. People are not earning the money they need to live. If I'm only earning, I think I was recently online, I think the living wage in the state of Ohio was deemed at $10.78. I don't know about you, but the little person who lives in my house can eat $10.78 worth of food in about 32 seconds. So if I'm talking about how do I take care of my family, and for those of you who pay for child care, 1 year in child care, I pay more than I pay for my mortgage. So when you talk about all of those things and people are not earning the money to live, they're just earning money to pay other people, that creates a challenge. So I think that's one of the first things that we have to start to talk about is how do we begin to pay people a living wage so that they can take care of their families and end the cycle of poverty. Most people who are deemed under the poverty level don't want to be there. They just have not had the opportunity to move out of that situation.
Thank you, Natasha. Hold on 1 second. I want to ask, do we have mics? We're gonna do a 1 mic system, all right? We're gonna make sure we have a little bit more control. You go right here, this lady right here. Oh, right here to the back.
Good evening. My name is Jamie G. I am from Montgomery County. Hello, Commissioner Rice. I'm the manager of the Montgomery County Office of Reentry. And we work with individuals that are formerly incarcerated, that are returning to Montgomery County from Ohio prisons, federal prisons as well. One of the things that I see often is individuals such as who we serve, the population we serve, that have a wealth of knowledge in this gun violence issue, because they have not only been behind bars as a result of the issue of gun violence, many of them, but also have been victims of gun violence. We had a conversation in the last cohort that we had of our Reentry Career Alliance Academy about the Oregon shooting. And one of the ladies whose cousin was in the hospital as a result of the victim of the shooting. The employer that came in the next day to talk to our clients, one of his employees passed away as a result of that Oregon shooting. And so when we think about who this is impacting, how do we mobilize the individuals that we don't necessarily use, or should I say have value and worth that we don't typically see that can be value to the community, look to individuals that may have, maybe come through. We have alumni, we have graduates from our Reentry Academy that would be more than welcome to tackle this issue. We also, I just sat with a group of young people at the Evening Reporting Center, Montgomery County Juvenile Probation. We had a conversation about this very meeting. I asked them, I said, did you bring them here so they can hear this conversation? They talked about being sad about the gun violence. They talked about, one young lady talked about in one day, people that she knew, they were 15, 17, and 19, and one day their life just taken from them at the blink of an eye. Another young man, there's 3 that raised their hands and said, yeah, I had someone very close to me, and they were young in age. All 3 of them referred to those experiences. And I said, how does that make you feel? And they said, it's sad. One of the young ladies said, sad. The other gentleman said, I don't know how it makes me feel. And then the others were silent, which makes me come to believe that they're numb to this. Just like the gentleman said that the shots. I too hear shots. I live on the west side too. And I've come to see it as commonplace. That's unfortunate that it's commonplace. But I think really looking at our youth, what they're receiving, like Will said over here in the end, about looking at, we make physicals a prerequisite and mandatory in order to enroll in school, right? We don't look at a mental health evaluation, do we? Do we look at a mental health screening to make sure that they're okay? Do we look at, we're talking about bringing music back in schools because youth gravitate towards art, music therapy. Do we think about art therapy and music therapy and drama therapy? Because that's what they gravitate to. They need therapy. So that's just suggestions I have as not only a citizen of Dayton, but also as a leader within the community.
Thank you. Thank you. And if we could, just keep our comment or question to like 2 minutes, if we could, just to make sure that everyone who wants to speak, we want to try to make sure that they have room to do so.
Okay, this question is for Mayor Whaley. Now you had mentioned about mental health. What about homelessness? What is being done about homelessness in the community? I see people actually come to me at my job and ask if we deal with homeless people, and I always recommend people go to Hopeful, and however they have so many restrictions, and not only that, I also see people, as I'm sure most people have seen, out on Siegenthaler, North Main Street, all over town with the signs up saying, please help me, I'm homeless. What is being done about homelessness in the community?
Thanks for that question. Well, a couple of things that we've done over the past decade that we continue to work on, and then I'll talk about things we're doing this year and then still the challenges. So about 12 years ago, the county and the city came together to work on an effort to end what we call chronic homelessness. And we've actually been more successful than other communities across the country in that effort. Chronic homelessness is a definition by the federal government that talks about, and I don't have it perfect now, I knew it perfect a few years ago. It's about being always homeless. So it's not an example where people suddenly lose their apartment for a month. It's about this chronic kind of homelessness. We've been really successful in dealing with that issue. Actually, we're like the 15th, for example, 15th city in the country to end veterans homelessness. So we had a system in place so every veteran is housed, and we're only one of 15 cities in the country that have done that. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done in some of those examples. However, we have a serious issue around evictions. We're 26th in the country on eviction issues, and really that's where you see homelessness before it comes. And so this year we put together an eviction task force to really look at what other communities are doing, ways that we can attack this issue in our community, and ways that we can get to folks before they become homeless, particularly because this affects African American women and children the most. The community that is most affected by this issue is that group of folks. And so we're looking at ways that we can look at our systems to invest more, to talk about tenant rights, so how people can make sure that they know their rights before they're evicted, ways that we can get them to put money in escrow so they're not evicted during that process. So really trying to get there at the beginning. Let me say too, this homeless issue is happening across the country, and I think what Natasha mentioned is a really good point. We have an issue in Dayton where it's a different look of homelessness or housing insecurity compared to Portland, Oregon, or San Francisco, right? And in that place, the housing cost is so expensive that you nearly need to be a millionaire to have an apartment, right? In Dayton, the issue is different. Our wages are so low that you can't afford anything. And so this wage issue that we've seen post-Great Recession is a very real issue for our community. It's one that sadly cities don't have a lot of say over and a lot of control, but one where we need to start working and having that conversation about the wage. And you see it anything from watching American Factory with the Fuyao site to a lot of the sites where our wage used to be much higher for middle class opportunities. They're really gone, and that's not just Dayton, but that's everywhere in the country that we're trying to work on. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Mayor Weber. I have a quick question to ask is where can community members get free gun locks? Or is there anywhere that anyone on this panel is aware of? Free gun locks. Gun locks. Is there anywhere? The Dayton Police Department has boxes of them.
Okay, it'll be easier this way. We do have free gun locks available at the Dayton Police Academy. If you call 333-1614, that'll put you in touch with them, and they'll be able to hand them out. And they're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, so they'll be available. We'll also put them out on our social media pages also.
And I was just told, in addition to the Dayton Police Department, thank you, that the VA has them available for veterans as well. And so, for whoever that question. I know this gentleman right here, I think, had his hand up first. I saw.
Keep your hand up.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Thomas. I'm not a Dayton native, never have. Maybe one day, but not on this day. I grew up in Cleveland. I'm from Cleveland. Cleveland Projects. I was a part of gentrification before I even knew what that word was. I seen it happen, and it's happening on the west side also. But what I want to say is, when we come to these meetings, man, it'd be hard to sit here because we talk about the same thing over and over and over. Like, it's repetitive hearing people jack off facts. Like, everybody just saying what we all know already. It's like sitting in somebody's church and you agreeing with the pastor because what you know what he's saying is right. Like, we're all in agreement with each other. And what's going on in Dayton on the west side, and when we say west side, we're talking about black folks, being honest. When we talk about the east side of Cleveland, when we talk about these different areas, to get to the root of the problem, what's going on is by design. Everything that's going on is by design. So to get to the root of it, you got to get rid of the people that's sitting in these positions, like these folks sitting up front, or Bill, or Mayor Nan Whaley. And I'm being honest, and that's how I feel. Because if they were doing their job, we wouldn't be sitting here in the first place. And that's all I have to say.
We want to keep the comments to 2 minutes.
Okay, my name is Reverend Renee Shepherd, and I want to talk about mass shooting that's been done by Caucasians that have mental problems. And a lot of people I know that's of that race that
question, and I think Mayor Whaley spoke to it a little bit about when she talked about some of the current legislation that the governor is working on, and also some of the current legislation that she's been working on in DC as well to try and address those issues with guns.
Supremacy is part of the makeup of these mass shooters. Are you guys as leaders willing to come forward and speak honestly on white supremacy and how it plays into these mass shootings and white male terrorism? Because that's the real problem. We know about mental health, we know about gun laws, but we want to talk about white male terrorism and white supremacy. That's what we came for to hear. We didn't come to hear all this other stuff. Can we hear something, and especially those of y'all who's running for office or who are in office, you see even the Democratic candidates for president, they're now starting to talk about white supremacy and white male terrorism. And so we need to have an honest conversation. We need politicians and community leaders who are courageous enough to talk about this, because everybody is dying. When the guy walks in Walmart and starts shooting, he don't just shoot black people, he shoot everybody. So it's in all of our best interests that we talk about this issue.
Hold on one second. Thank you, Mr. Dunn. I want to go to this gentleman. He had his hand up for a little while.
I asked for speed up front. I'm going to try to be as fast as possible. 3 months ago, there was a shooting over at Northwest Rec Center. City staff called in to 911. Another caller called in. It took police 5+ minutes to respond. There were children on the playground. There were people in the parking lot, people in the building. It was roughly noon on a Saturday. I'd like to make a specific suggestion based on my experience of trying to find out why that took so long to be responded to. There were 6 or 7 shots fired in the parking lot. It seems that regional dispatch assigns priority to calls, and again, because it's so common, everybody's hearing this, shots all over the city. So it's relatively low priority, but it was also a staffing issue that day, is my understanding. We have police officers running around trying to put Narcan to bring folks back that are doing overdoses. I think that maybe it would help to use our scarce police resources if we could have some sort of regional cooperation to have the paramedics and the fire folks be answering those kinds of calls. I understand that there's somebody dying on the pavement if they've overdosed, but to a certain extent, that's a choice, and I know that's kind of a judgmental call, but when we have shots being fired at a city facility with children present and public present, and a police officer can't get there for over 5 minutes, there needs to be some improvement in that picture. And anybody up front, if you want to try to address that, but it's a specific suggestion to try to get a handle on getting police officers out where we need them.
Just to respond briefly to that particular question, there is regional cooperation in response to the opioid epidemic, which is a nationwide epidemic. And senior leadership of the city and the county got together in the formulation of the COAT, which is the Community Overdose Action Team, that developed a comprehensive approach to the opioid epidemic, which resulted in shortly after its formation, roughly 6 months or 9 months into it, a 50% reduction in overdose epidemics in this community and deaths, while they were continuing to escalate in other areas in Ohio. So there was a community-wide response to that epidemic. I would not agree with the perspective that a police officer coming upon an overdose has Narcan or has the capacity to do something should do nothing. We're in the business of trying resources available, we should try to do so.
All right, so we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Not tell them what you feel and what you believe and what they need to do and all that kind of stuff. Because I don't know that you're going to make them change their minds tonight. But we have time for maybe one or two more questions in here this evening. All right? You go right here.
Okay,
She
so,
got her hands up.
would you like a mic? I appreciate everything that you guys have said.
So sorry, may I hand you the mic?
Yeah.
And I actually know a couple of you personally. I know Jared Randy, and he's fabulous. We didn't come here to talk about the problem. And it seems like that every time I show up to a community meeting, we talk about what we should do, what we would have done, what we can do, but we never, ever get to solutions. I am with Black Lives Matter Miami Valley. I am looking to the leadership to give me directives of how I will take what the resolutions and the solutions that you give us to the community. Whenever I leave here, I leave with nothing except for I recognize the brilliance in all of you, some of you. The problem is that we come here for answers and solutions and resolutions. We have a race problem in our community when it comes to policing. We never talk about that. There is a root cause to poverty, absolutely, and what you said is so imperative, but it won't matter because rich black people are getting killed by police too. The problem is not just poverty. We are looking for answers. Please make sure that when we come to the next community meeting, when I'm speaking to everybody, give us some answers, some solutions, and some directives. Quit telling us how great you are. We already know that. We know our community is suffering. We need answers. We don't need resumes. Please.
So if I could just...
I'm right here. Ma'am, I'm right here.
So if I could just speak to that from my perspective, and I can't speak for the other members of the CPC. While I absolutely understand your frustration, this body was not put together to solve problems. This body was put together to give voice to problems that this siloed community, because Dayton is one of the most segregated and siloed communities I've ever been in, and I've traveled the entire country and have been abroad. It was put together to give voice to the issues that different individuals didn't know existed because this community lives in silos. I absolutely understand your frustration, but we work collectively to take information back to the powers that be who are the bookends of this table in addition to their teams. So when we come, we give you what we've identified in our conversations as the evolving challenges of this community. And they're ever evolving because when you think about it, we've heard about opioid addiction, we've heard about poverty, we've heard about violence. It's a lot going on in this community. There's no way that this body of volunteers can resolve those issues, but we do work diligently to make sure that they remain top of mind with the leadership that's in this room who can make those decisions.
Thank you. Thank you. We had this lady had her hand up from way back near the beginning, and I just didn't get to her. So I want to be fair. I want to give her an opportunity to answer her question.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is Frances Duncan. I'm a psychotherapist. My office is at 713 West Grand. We used to be in the Oregon district. We moved to this area because of the people that we feel that we can better help here. I work a lot with trauma, physical, sexual abuse. I have a program called Strong, and coincidentally our website is strongdate.com and .org. My point is that we're offering a free group. We've been working for 3 weeks now with victims of mass shooting. We've had 11 people show up regularly to our groups, and what we're hearing is horrific of what people experienced that were there. One of those persons was actually shot. The others were the people who witnessed other people be killed in front of their face, people running around with trying to do CPR to people who were dying, and the trauma is just horrific. And they stated that, there were so many in the Oregon district that night that are probably not getting any help. So in terms of people getting help and mental health, I think that's a key point, but also prevention. The people that are in the group, I asked them, I told them were Lisa Patrick and I co-founded Grassroots, what they would like us to say tonight. And they said that they wanted it to be known that people have been very insensitive to them. There was the fireworks that happened recently the other night, and it triggered PTSD unbelievably in those victims of trauma. They said nobody notified them, they didn't know what was going to happen. All the progress they've been making, they reverted back to being afraid to go out of their house and sleeping on the floor because that felt safer than sleeping on the bed. But my point is that there's a big need. We're doing a free group. If anybody knows anybody that was affected by the shooting, it's on Wednesday nights at 6 p.m. We welcome any who might need that help, and we'd like to work together as a community to provide for all those people. So yes, there were a certain number shot and a certain number killed, but there was also hundreds or thousands that were affected also that were a part of that. The other thing is with the STRONG program, it's for children in the abuse prevention. Tonight, my daughter Lisa and I did a group superhero training camp. It's a self-empowerment group. Kids of all races, these are little guys, 5, 6 years old. And one of the little boys in that group is a miracle child because his mother was shot in West Dayton. And she was 9 months pregnant with him. She died. And she lived long enough to give birth to this little boy who was also shot, but is struggling and doing his best. We have kids in that group that have been sexually abused, and you think about anger and what happens when kids grow up without treatment. I'm sorry. My information, the STRONG program is like I said, 713 West Grand, 719-0522, and we'd like you guys to know we're there.
One last question. 1 minute. Just 1 minute. Shante has been waiting. Keep it very brief. We have to do it here soon.
Very quick. My name is Shante Miles. I have a question about the police cover and corruption. I had 2 sons that were, I did go to HRC because I didn't feel that my son's cases were investigated properly. As a matter of fact, I have evidence that they weren't. And I went to HRC and they helped me with the paperwork to turn into the internal affairs to be reviewed. And what I got back was a telephone call saying what the police officers did, well, they don't work here anymore, so there's nothing we can do about that. But what the crime lab did was criminal. And so when I called and I tried to get help for the police department, I get hung up on our legal runaround, saying that we don't cover this part, we don't cover that part, we have to go to this department and that department. Well, I'm confused because I had 2 deceased sons that were killed, and they said that something else happened other than that. The police wrote that narrative. That's not what happened. And I need somebody to hear my son's voices tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Shante. Thank you. I understand that this process is incredibly frustrating, right? We all are here largely unsatisfied because this process can be unsatisfying at times. But if you have burning questions, please write them down. Give them to some people around the room collecting. Leslie, can you raise your hand? Jeanette, can you raise your hand? Please collect. They will collect your questions. Also, email me, Jared, Jared.Grandy, GRANDY @ DaytonOhio.com. We will continue to have these conversations. We will continue to try to reach out to you all. We will continue to try to answer these questions the best we can. Justice is a slow and tedious process. Justice is something that should happen every day. Justice is what Javier and Devin should receive, is what they should have received. And as I mention their name, can we please respect the dead and join me in the moment of silence? Thank you. So if you would you please join me in thanking our panel? Continue to do. Vote. There's an election on November 5th. Vote. Show up. Bring your anger. Bring your frustration. Bring your solutions. We'll continue to listen. Again, thank you. Good night.
So sorry, one more thing. Just because we are in a church and we want to respect their space, can everyone please make sure to take their garbage and dispose of it properly? Thank you very much for allowing us to use their space. We just want to make sure we respect it. Thank you very much.